The Project Gutenberg ebook of Rhythm Rides the Rocket. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. Title: Rhythm Rides the Rocket. Author: Bob Olsen. Illustrator: Frank R. Paul. Release date: February 12, 2024. Ebook number 72942. Language: English. Original publication: New York, New York, Columbia Publications, Inc., 1940. Credits: Greg Weeks, Mary Meehan, and the online distributed proofreading team at http://www.pgdp.net. This file was produced from images generously made available by the Internet Archive. Start of the Project Gutenberg ebook. Rhythm Rides the Rocket. Rhythm Rides the Rocket by Bob Olsen. Science Fiction Classics No. 6, published by Columbia Publications Incorporated. 60 Hudson Street, New York, New York. Printed in the USA. Having piloted the spaceship Goddard through that perilous zone of pelting planetoids and ghostly derelicts which make the region between Mars and Jupiter a nerve-wracking nightmare for space pilots, Captain Timothy Verger felt an urgent need for rest and relaxation. Turning the controls over to Alphonse Ledoux, the regular interplanetary company's pilot, he opened the door which led to the main cabin. On the threshold he paused and gingerly inhaled a disgusted sniff. The place reeked. Not that Captain Verger was particularly squeamish about odors. A veteran space flyer does not expect the interior of a rocket ship to smell like a spruce forest. The sensations which offended Verger's nostrils were not exactly unpleasant, but they certainly did not belong in an interplanetary freighter. They were feminine smells, the mingled fragrance of talcum powder, cold cream, and perfume. And if the odors were incongruous, the sights and the sounds which accompanied them were even more so. The cabin was crowded with women. There must have been at least 20 of them, ranging in ages from 18 to 25. All of them were playing lustily on horns, clarinets and other musical instruments. Of all the unheard of things, Verger thought as he ducked beneath the flare of an enormous tuba and sidestepped to avoid the sudden thrust of a trombone slide. A band rehearsal in the space lanes, a million miles from nowhere, and a female band at that. Squeezing between the compactly grouped musicians, Verger could not help brushing against the elbow of the bass drummer. She was somewhat older than the others, perhaps 30, he guessed. Although she was not exactly what a television scout would call glamorous, she was the kind of girl who would interest almost any man except a middle-aged, chronic woman-hater like Verger. Framed in a cloud of wavy red hair, her full red lips, pert nose, and humorous eyes told an eloquent story of wholesome good nature. As Verger slid past her, mumbling an inaudible apology, she flashed a white-toothed smile at him, shocking him with a deliberate brazen wink. Though he tried to look stern and indifferent, he had to smile back at her in spite of himself. Opening the door of the men's stateroom, Verger gave a cursory greeting to Professor Anderson, who was seated before a small bench which he had rigged up in one corner of the cramped quarters. He was working on a peculiar contraption which looked like a small horn attached to a strange jumble of coils and tubes. Knowing that Anderson was an inventor as well as a composer and music teacher, Verger assumed that the device was some new kind of band instrument. Weary and nervous, the pilot crawled into his hammock and attempted to relax. It was a difficult task. Hard as he tried, he could not shake off the feeling of tense anxiety which disturbed and tormented him. "There's nothing to worry about," he tried to assure himself. "Ledoux is an experienced pilot with almost as many space hours to his credit as I have. Nevertheless, Captain Verger couldn't squeeze from his mind the thought that the safety of this ship with its 3 men and its 20 women depended on him and on him alone. In the hope of clearing up certain matters which puzzled him, Verger began talking to Anderson. "Would you mind giving me the lowdown on this crazy voyage?" he asked. Anderson countered with, "Do you mean to say you don't know why you are here?" "Frankly, I don't," the captain admitted. "My orders simply directed me to report to the Earth Republic spaceport on Mars and to pilot the space freighter Goddard with a cargo of supplies for the thallium mines on Ganymede. It was somewhat surprising for me to find out most of the so-called supplies were female bips and peckhorns stained with lipstick." Anderson laughed. "It does seem rather incongruous, doesn't it?" "Yeah," Verger agreed. "Whatever that word means, it's all right. What I want to know is why. Being an inveterate bachelor, I suppose you wouldn't understand," Anderson smiled. "However, since you have spent many years on far-flung planets and satellites, perhaps you can realize that the lives of the 80 or 90 men who were exiled to the thallium mines on Ganymede are not very pleasant." Verger sniffed. "They must be cream puffs if they kick about Ganymede. It has the nicest climate in the solar system when you get used to it." "It isn't the climate the men object to," Anderson amplified. "Their discontentment is due to being deprived of things they formerly enjoyed. Most of them were married just before they embarked for Ganymede, you know." "First I heard of that," was Verger's abbreviated comment. Anderson continued, "The government promised to transport the exiles' wives to Ganymede as soon as it could feasibly be accomplished. This is the first shipload. Do you mean to tell me that all those female horn tutors are married to Ganymedian exiles?" Verger exclaimed. Anderson nodded. "But why the trombones and saxophones?" "That also is part of the campaign for more contented miners," the inventor explained. "A ballot discloses that, next to their wives, the thing most needed by the exiles is music." "I see," Verger grinned. "A variation of the old wheeze about wine, women, and song." "Something like that. And, since liquor is taboo, only the women and the music remained. On this first trip there was room enough for only 1/4 of the wives who wanted to join their husbands. They were about to draw lots when someone thought of the bright idea of selecting first the women who could play band instruments, thereby providing musical consolation for the benefit of the less fortunate men whose wives were delayed in transit. I suppose you were the one who picked the hornblowers," Verger assumed. "Yes, and since an immediate departure was imperative, I was ordered to accompany them and to train them during the long, tedious voyage. I feel quite proud of their progress. By the way, what do you think of our band of exiles' wives?" Verger parried the question with another one. "Did you say all those girls are married, even the red-headed bass drummer?" "Oh, you mean Helen Green?" Anderson smiled. "Yes, she's married like all the rest of the girls." The chiseling tramp," Verger murmured to himself as he turned his face to the wall and fell asleep. Chapter 2: Forced Landing. Following hours of fitful slumber during which he dreamed of all the perils and catastrophes that could possibly bedevil a spaceship, Verger awoke with a start which would have bounced him out of his hammock had he not taken the precaution of zipping himself in. More than ever before, a premonition of impending disaster crowded into his worried mind. Squeezing a handful of water from a drinking tube, he quickly washed his hands and face, hurried to the control room and strapped himself into the starboard control seat. "Shall I relieve you, Al?" he panted. Ledoux glanced at the chronometer and said, "No, thanks, Tim. I still have 47 minutes left of my shift." Then, seeming to sense a note of tension in his friend's voice, he exclaimed, "What's the matter, old man?" "Oh, Nothing, Verger assured him. You know, of course, that I never interfere with the work of another flyer. No dual-seat piloting for me. For Pete's sake, spill it. Alphonse cried. What's wrong with the way I'm running this ash can? If you don't mind my saying so, I think you're shooting too darn close to Callisto. Maybe so, Ledoux conceded. We're several hours behind our schedule. I figured I might make it up by using the full force of Jupiter's gravitational pull. That meant shaving a slice out of Callisto's stratosphere, but we have plenty of momentum to carry us past the satellite without any risk. Let's hope so, was Verger's pessimistic response. I'd hate to make a forced landing on Callisto. Why? Ledoux wanted to know. Isn't Callisto inhabited? Sure, it's inhabited. That's the trouble. The natives of Callisto are unquestionably the most fearful and the most ruthless fiends in the known universe. What's so fearful about them? His companion asked. Well, for one thing, they're too blamed curious. Curious? Ledoux questioned. Is that such a terrible crime? It is when it is carried to extremes, like they do. Maybe you haven't heard, but the Callisto boys have an unpleasant habit of grabbing every human being they can get hold of, merely for the playful purpose of cutting them open to find out what makes them tick. Vivisection, I guess you'd call it. Nice people, was Ledoux's comment. Yeah, and the worst of it is that there's nothing we humans can do about it. No weapon known to man can harm them. They shed lethal rays like a duck sheds water. Bullets from old-fashioned machine guns go right through them without apparent damage. I ought to know because leaving his sentence suspended in space, Verger exclaimed, leaping Luna. What's that? Staring through the thick, super-transparent window in the direction which the captain indicated, Ledoux saw a weird, lavender-hued beam shoot out from the surface of Callisto. For 2 or 3 tense seconds it whipped around in a spiral path which centered the beam right on the nose of the Goddard, bathing the craft with its throbbing, blinding glare. There was a jolt which nearly snapped the strong bands of webbing which strapped the 2 men into their control seats. Followed then that horrible, oppressive feeling of excessive weight, which told the experienced space pilots that their velocity was being decelerated rapidly, far more rapidly than any sensible pilot would dare to retard his flight by means of braking rockets. Like a swimmer trying to fight his way out of the clutches of a dangerous riptide, Ledoux strove to steer the Goddard diagonally across the powerful current of quivering, menacing energy, but his attempts to maneuver the rocket ship out of the beam's perilous influence were fruitless. With inexorable power, the beam seemed to be sucking the spaceship toward the surface of the satellite, while at the same time it was retarding the Goddard's terrific speed. Closer and closer loomed the enormous globe of Callisto, until it blotted out everything else. Finally, with an almost imperceptible jar, the rocket ship pancaked into a nest of grotesque vegetation which clothed the perilous satellite. Verger, who had closed his eyes to guard himself against blindness, opened them just in time to see a preposterous object thrust itself out of an enormous hole only a few feet away, and wrap itself about the spaceship. It was not a snake, nor was it exactly similar to the tentacle of a large cephalopodous animal. There was something about its creepy, slithering movements which suggested the pseudopodia of an amoebian organism, if one could stretch one's imagination sufficiently to conceive of an amoeba of such cosmic size. Tearing his fascinated gaze away from this horrible object, which seemed to be holding the spaceship imprisoned in its ominous embrace, Verger unbuckled the straps of his control seat and hurried back to the women's quarters. Fortunately, all the girls had been zipped snugly in their spring-braced hammocks at the moment when the beam had struck the spaceship. Although they were all somewhat shaken and badly frightened, none of them was seriously injured. Chapter 3 Music on Ganymede. The spot where the spaceship made its compulsory landing was like a small park. It was divided into geometrically fashioned beds of fantastic, crawling vines, vivid with huge, gaudy flowers and purple-hued, spongy foliage. Surrounding the open space were a number of flat, cylindrical objects which resembled the pieces on an enormous checkerboard. Swinging open, like the lids of gigantic waffle irons, these cylinders belched forth a host of preposterous creatures. Comparable in size to walruses, their orange-hued bodies were shaped like gigantic slugs or shell-less snails. Their movements, however, were anything but snail-like. With incredible swiftness they flowed toward the spaceship from all directions. As if arrested by a sharp command, they all stopped before they reached the Goddard, ringing it at a respectable distance with an oval wall of pulsating bodies. After a tense period of seeming indecision, one of their number separated from the others and oozed boldly across the intervening space. Through the crystal-clear window, Captain Verger could plainly distinguish the creature's face, which, fantastic as it was, weirdly suggested a superior degree of intelligence, such as only human beings can claim. Ears and nostrils it undoubtedly possessed, the former being spirally coiled, like cinnamon rolls, and the latter resembling the muzzle of a double-barreled shotgun. Unusually large was the mouth, which was armed with 3 rows of greenish teeth. Of all the grotesque features, the most peculiar were its organs of vision. Telescopic, like those of a lobster, its glaring, lidless eyes were mounted on long stalks so that they could be turned in all directions and focused by drawing them in and out. For a breathless minute, those weird eyes explored the interior of the spaceship. Then something resembling a 3-fingered hand protruded from the creature's shoulder, stretched out until it became a long arm and made an unmistakable beckoning gesture. "Come out," it said as clearly as if it had uttered those very words. Verger answered with a shake of his head, which, though silent, was emphatically eloquent. Within the crowded cabin of the spaceship, not a sound was heard. The girls had tumbled out of their hammocks and were huddled together, too frightened to speak or even to scream. Like birds fascinated by a serpent, they gazed fearfully at that fiendish face, and when it disappeared from the window, they simultaneously turned their hypnotized eyes on Captain Verger. It was Helen Green, the red-headed drummer girl who, assuming the post of spokeswoman, broke the silence. "Well, Captain," she said in a voice which she tried hard to keep from trembling, "what do we do now?" Verger startled them all by shouting, "I'll tell you what to do. Get into your uniforms. Unpack your horns. Let's have a good, rousing tune right now." For a while they stared at him as if they feared he had lost his mind. Professor Anderson, who was standing close to Verger, whispered, "Do you really mean that, Captain?" "Certainly I mean it." The pilot yelled. "Since you are in charge of the band, will you please see to it that my orders are carried out?" "But why the uniforms?" "I don't." "There's no time for argument," Verger interrupted him. "It's extremely important that the girls dress in their uniforms. Please request them to do so at once." A moment later, when the 3 men were shut in the control compartment in order that the girls could use the main cabin as a dressing room, Verger apologized to Anderson, "Sorry I had to be so blunt, Professor. You see, it was apparent that all the ladies were in a blue funk. Things are going to be tough enough for us without a bunch of hysterical women on our hands. I figured that something had to be done to distract their minds, and there's nothing that absorbs the interest of a female like dolling up in fancy duds." "I see," Anderson exclaimed. "So that was the reason why you insisted on the uniforms?" "Not entirely. I had other reasons. These Callisto babies are smart people, a lot smarter than we are in most things. but there's one subject they don't know anything at all about, and that's music. And your idea is to stage a band concert for their benefit? Asked Anderson. Exactly. And what do you think will happen then? I don't know. Anything can happen. But, no matter what they do about it, we can't be any worse off than we are right now. Tell your girls to toot like they've never tooted before. Let's hope that the Callisto boys like it. If they do, it may save us. What makes you think so? Anderson asked. Because these babies are known to be the most inquisitive beings in the universe. If I am right about their not knowing anything about music, your band is sure to arouse their curiosity. They'll want to find out all about it, and they can't very well do that if they cut the gizzards out of the musicians. Do you get the idea? While Verger and Anderson were talking, Ledoux had kept close watch through the windows of the control room. Suddenly he exclaimed, "Look what's coming now." A queer-looking machine was slowly approaching the spaceship. It was like a combination of a steam shovel and a pile driver. Suspended by means of a cable from a long boom, a metal ball, which must have weighed several tons, was swinging back and forth like a colossal pendulum. What do you suppose it is? Anderson whispered tensely. Whatever it is, it looks like bad news, exclaimed Verger. My guess is that they intend to use it to batter a hole in our shell. We've got to stop them from doing that. If they wreck the ship, we'd never be able to get away from here. What can we do about it? Ledoux demanded. You said yourself that no human weapons have any effect on them. There's only one thing to do, Verger replied. And that is to open the hatch before that thingamajig starts massaging our hull. Without giving any warning, he flung open the door of the main cabin. Most of the girls were already dressed in their vivid, purple and green uniforms. Two of them, who were still partially undressed, uttered little screams, but Captain Verger paid no attention to them. Striding to the circular hatch, he quickly unscrewed the ponderous clamps and slid the door open. Then he turned and shouted, "Hurry, girls! There isn't a moment to lose. All of you get your instruments to working and follow me." "What are we going to play?" someone squealed. "Play anything, any snappy march will do." Anderson came to the rescue with the command, "Play the March of the Rocketeers." The girls raised their instruments and were just about to start playing when Verger shouted, "One moment, please. We've all got to be in this, the men as well as the women. Otherwise they may get the idea that the men aren't needed in the band and will start to carve us up. How about it, Professor? Have you any extra instruments?" Anderson shook his head. "Any objects that resemble musical instruments will do." "Where's that gimmick you were working on?" "You mean my high-frequency sound projector?" "I'll get it right away." Anderson dashed into the stateroom, returning immediately with his invention. "Okay. You march along with the girls. Make believe you're playing on your doohickey. I'll pretend to play on this monkey wrench. Ledoux, you blow on your ray gun, but be careful you don't get absent-minded and pull the trigger." Stepping to the open hatch, Captain Verger yelled, "Okay, girls. Now play like you've never played before. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go." With the blaring band streaming after him, and with his ridiculous monkey wrench pressed against his lips, he strode forth to the soil of the hostile satellite. It was indeed an astounding spectacle. Arrayed in their vividly colored uniforms, their hearts thumping with excitement, the musical wives of the exiled miners played and strutted as if they knew their lives depended on their skill. Pretending to pay no attention to the beasts who still formed an ominous ring around the spaceship, Verger waded through a tangle of vegetation to what looked like a walk or beaten path. Along this he marched, and the ring of slug men opened to let the band pass through. Out of the corner of his eyes, Captain Verger watched the natives, for he realized that the fate of his band hung on one thing and one thing only, and that was the reaction of its audience. At first, the only effect he discerned was one of astonishment. Obviously the Calistonians were taken completely by surprise. They didn't know what to do, and so they did nothing except follow this amazing procession. Doubling around in a wide circle, Verger led the band back toward the spaceship. Like children watching a circus parade, the natives formed a lane, along which the musicians had to pass. It was then that Captain Verger noticed something that gave him relieved encouragement. Practically all of the listeners were swaying back and forth, keeping exact time with the catchy strains of the stirring march. It was apparent that, even though they were ignorant of music, they certainly had a sense of rhythm. None of them made any attempts to molest the human beings as they marched back and re-entered the spaceship. Chapter 4 The Understudies. Knowing the Calistonians' reputation for inquisitiveness, Verger fully expected that some of them would follow the band into the spaceship. They surprised him, however, by moving away from the Goddard instead of toward it. In a cleared space which was some distance away but close enough so that the occupants of the ship could see them clearly, the natives of the satellite gathered together, forming a huge circle with their heads all pointed toward the center. Apparently they were holding a conference or town meeting to decide what to do about these unprecedented eventualities. Verger took advantage of this interlude to make a thorough examination of the weird tentacle which was still coiled about the Goddard, shackling it firmly to the unfriendly satellite. Calling to Anderson, he said, "You're a scientist, Professor. Suppose you give this thing the once-over and see if you can make anything out of it." The inventor inspected the snake-like object minutely, using the magnifying glass to supplement his naturally keen vision. Finally he remarked, "It looks like protoplasm." "You mean you think it's something living?" Anderson nodded. "But how could anything living be so enormous?" Verger doubted. "Surely you don't believe that an underground monster could have a tentacle as big as that?" "Perhaps the satellite itself is a living organism," Anderson suggested. Ledoux, who had overheard the conversation, remarked, "How utterly ridiculous." "I wouldn't say that," Verger disagreed. "I've seen too many strange things in my time to call anything ridiculous. But if this satellite was really alive, we'd certainly know about it," Ledoux protested. "Not necessarily," said Anderson. "Do you think the fleas and microbes that crawl the hairy forests on the surface of a Saint Bernard dog have any conception of the living thing which they inhabit?" While Ledoux and Anderson were talking, Verger had disappeared into the spacecraft, from which he presently emerged brandishing a large, razor-edged axe. "We'll soon find out whether it's alive or not," he cried, as he swung the powerful weapon over his head and slashed it with a mighty effort into the thing. The axe penetrated the substance as easily as if it had been made of jelly. In fact, the blade sank completely out of sight. Almost instantly the wound closed, leaving the outer surface intact. When Verger tried to withdraw the axe, he found that he did not have strength enough to do so. "Here, fellows, give me a hand," he yelled. All three of them tugged at the axe handle without being able to dislodge the blade. Finally they strained so hard that the hickory shaft cracked and the portion which was attached to the blade was sucked out of sight. For an instant Verger stood with his mouth open, gazing foolishly at the broken rod in his hand. Then he swore and exclaimed, "Now, just what does that prove?" Anderson shrugged his shoulders and said nothing. "If you ask me," said Ledoux, "it proves that we're stuck here for the rest of our lives, which probably won't be long enough to become tedious." Meanwhile, the natives of Callisto had apparently completed their conference, for they started back toward the spaceship. When he saw them approaching, Verger rushed inside and shouted, "Play, girls! Your customers must have liked your routine, because they're coming back for more." Taking the lead, one of the saxophone players blew an introductory measure of an old, familiar dance tune, and the rest of the band lustily joined in. If it had not been for the seriousness of their predicament, the three men would have derived a great deal of amusement from the subsequent behavior of the Callisto natives. First they marched, or rather crawled, around the spaceship in single file, keeping time to the music with graceful movements of their sinuous bodies. Then they separated into groups, performing some remarkable, rhythmic maneuvers, which seemed to be both spontaneous and original. "They're dancing!" Ledoux exclaimed. "It's sort of an ancient square dance. I believe it was called the quadrille." "Looks more like the Big Apple to me," Anderson remarked. "Big Apple?" Verger questioned. "What in the solar system is that?" "It's the name of a dance which was popular back in the 20th century. I remember seeing the dance depicted by some motion pictures which were kept in a museum to show the customs of human insects called jitterbugs who lived in what they called the terrible 30s. "Very interesting," was Captain Verger's comment. "All I can say is, on with the dance. Let joy be unrefined. If it will keep the minds of those slug men out of mischief, more power to rhythm." "Looks as if they won't bother us for a while at least," Anderson remarked. "I believe I shall take advantage of this interlude to make the final adjustments on my invention. It is practically completed, you know." "Go to it, by all means," Verger urged him. "And, by the way, Professor, just what is the nature of that contraption of yours?" "I call it a high-frequency sound projector. If you're interested, just step into my laboratory and I'll explain it to you while I am working on it." A moment later, when they were in the tiny stateroom which Anderson facetiously called his laboratory, the scientist began, "My high-frequency sound projector is merely a device for producing, focusing, and projecting supersonic vibrations, or waves which are similar to sound, but have enormously greater frequencies. No doubt you know that vibrations which are audible to the human ear range from 24 per second to about 40,000 per second. My device develops frequencies as high as 1,000,000 vibrations per second." "Did you originate the idea?" Verger asked. "Indeed not," Anderson hastened to state. "All I did was to carry on the work of other scientists. Early in the 20th century, during the so-called World War, supersonics were used to detect the presence of hostile submarines. While these high-frequency sound waves were being employed for this purpose, thousands of dead fishes were found floating on the surface of the ocean. It was suggested that these fishes might have been killed by the supersonic vibrations, and this assumption was subsequently verified by laboratory experiments." "And is that what your doohickey is for, just to kill fishes?" Verger asked. "It ought to do a great deal more than that," Anderson smiled. "The supersonics which killed small fishes had relatively low frequencies, only about 50,000 vibrations per second. My device develops frequencies of over 1,000,000 vibrations per second. Does that mean that your gimmick will kill larger animals?" The scientist answered, "I haven't tested it yet. But, reasoning by analogy, I believe it would be absolutely fatal to any larger animal, such as a human being, an elephant, or one of those Callisto devils," the captain exclaimed. "Jumping Jupiter! Maybe you've got something there, Professor. No weapon that has been tried so far has been able to stop one of those babies, but perhaps your supersonic thingamajig will do the trick." "That is a possibility," Anderson agreed. "However, since we have only one supersonic projector, I'm afraid we cannot wage a successful war against the entire population of Callisto." "Not very well," Verger had to admit. Nevertheless, I still have a hunch that your little doohickey is going to enable us to make our getaway. Professor Anderson was about to ask Verger what he had in mind, when he heard a knock on the door of the stateroom. In response to his invitation to enter, one of the women came in. It was Helen Green, the bass drummer. Startled by the expression on her face, the scientist said, "What's wrong, Mrs. Green? Why aren't you playing with the rest of the band?" "I got fired," was her astonishing statement. "You got fired?" Anderson exclaimed. "What in the universe are you raving about?" "You know how it is," she grinned. "Unskilled labor is always the first to feel the pinch of unemployment. Anyone can play the bass drum. That's why I lost my job." In a tone of exasperation which he tried hard to disguise, the professor said, "Please be more explicit, Mrs. Green. This is no time for facetiousness." "I'm not trying to be funny," she assured him. "If you don't think I meant it when I said I got fired, take a look at the individual that copped my job." Following her suggestion, Anderson and Verger stepped to the door and looked into the main cabin. Just beyond the entrance they were astonished to see one of the slug men. Armed with the padded drumstick, it was pounding lustily on the bass drum. 9 or 10 more of the Callisto natives were crowding the musicians. With their weird, telescopic eyes, the slug men were intently watching all the movements which the girls were making. "I believe I get the idea," Verger remarked. "Apparently they think that if they watch the musicians closely enough, they will learn how to play all the instruments themselves. Then they will organize a band of their own. As soon as they are able to get along without the human musicians, they will." Anderson kicked him in the shin just in time to stop him from finishing the sentence. If Helen noticed this byplay, she did not mention it. Instead she said, "Why don't you toss those kibitzers out, Captain?" Despite the seriousness of the situation, Verger couldn't help smiling. "We can't very well toss them out, Mrs. Green, any more than a hired orchestra could evict the sponsor of a television program who took a notion to play with the instruments during a broadcast for which he was footing the bill." By that time the enormous, fantastically glowing globe of Jupiter, upon which the daughter moon of Callisto depended for light and warmth, had rolled down the sky until only a small portion of it was visible above the horizon. Evidently the slug men abhorred being away from home after nightfall. At any rate, they departed as soon as the light began to wane, leaving behind them 20 tired, frightened girls and 3 worried men. Chapter V. The Dying Tentacle. Half an hour later, Verger, Anderson, and Ledoux stole forth from the rocket ship. Each of the men had a box-shaped object strapped on his back. All 3 of them carried coils of insulated wire, which they unwound as they advanced. When they were about a mile from the Goddard, Anderson removed the burden from his back and opened the package. It was a small but remarkably efficient phonograph, which was equipped with a powerful loudspeaker and a device for automatically changing records. After Professor Anderson had attached one of the wires to the phonograph and had adjusted the mechanism, he covered it with vines. Then they walked for approximately another mile in a direction which took them away from the spaceship at a slightly different angle. At this point, which happened to be in the midst of a thicket, they unpacked the second phonograph and connected it up to one of the insulated wires. The third phonograph was similarly installed and camouflaged at a point about 3 miles distant from the Goddard. Guided by the wires, the 3 Earthmen tramped back to the spaceship. They had scarcely reached their destination when ghostly tongues of magenta, orange, and lavender began to flame above the distant horizon, giving warning of the impending dawn of Jupiter. "Hurry, fellows," Captain Verger cried. "Al, will you please wake up the ladies? Tell them we're going for a little hike and that each one of them must bring her own instrument." Professor, will you please get your ultrasound device? I'll carry the storage batteries. What's the idea? Ledoux demanded. I'll tell you later. Time's wasting, so let's get going. A few moments later he was leading the entire party toward a thickly wooded forest which was about 200 meters distant, on the opposite side of the spaceship from the places where the phonographs had been concealed. In accordance with Verger's instructions, Ledoux carried the 3 coils of wire, unwinding them as he advanced. When they had penetrated the woods far enough to be completely concealed, the captain called a halt and proceeded to elucidate his peculiar orders. This is just a little game of hide and seek, he explained. All you have to do is keep out of sight and notice what happens. Peeping through the spongy foliage at the edge of the forest, he watched the slug men as they emerged from their homes and flocked toward the spaceship. He waited until 20 or 30 of them had entered the Goddard and had subsequently poured out again, rushing about in apparent excitement. Then he connected one of the wires to the storage battery. From the distant loudspeaker came the faint but unmistakable sounds of a brass band playing a stirring march in 6/8 time. The slug men must have heard it, for they all stopped and turned their heads in the direction of the concealed phonograph. For an instant they hesitated, then, like rats following the Pied Piper, they all trooped after the mysterious music, which they obviously assumed was being produced by the band of Earth folk. Verger glanced at his wristwatch, estimating the amount of time which the Callisto natives would require to reach the first phonograph. Then he disconnected the wires, waited a while, and switched the current to the second phonograph. In a similar manner he timed the intervening interval before connecting the third phonograph to the battery. Having thus tricked the enemy into a wild goose chase, Captain Verger herded his party back toward the spaceship. "Don't go in yet, ladies," he ordered. Then to Anderson he said, "Let's see what your supersonic doohickey will do to that tentacle thing that's holding our ship down." Acting on this suggestion, Anderson aimed his invention at the thick coil of sinew which held the Goddard captive, adjusted the mechanism carefully, and turned on the power. The thing began to writhe like a python in its death throes. Captain Verger fancied he could almost hear his beloved rocket ship groan as the massive coils tightened convulsively around it. But the staunch plates of superalloy, built to withstand the terrific pressures incident to interplanetary travel, held firm. Bracing himself to keep from falling to the ground, which was trembling like a miniature earthquake, Anderson continued to shoot the powerful waves at the struggling tentacle. Finally, as the vibrations cut through the massive tissues, the folds which encircled the ship uncoiled and slithered inertly to the ground. As he jumped backward to escape being hit by the dying thing, Anderson collided with Helen Green, who had been standing right behind him. He helped her to her feet and then said angrily, "What are you doing here? Why didn't you stand back where you belong, with the other girls?" "I'm sorry," she apologized. "I wanted to find out how that new gun of yours works, so I stood right behind you and watched you operate it." A second later, when Captain Verger rushed into the Goddard's control compartment, he was nearly startled out of his wits. Barring his way was an enormous slug man, who had obviously been left behind to guard the spaceship. With a beastly snarl which sent cold shivers racing along the Earthman's spine, the creature seized him in its slimy arms and lifted his 200-pound body as easily as if he had been a baby. Verger had barely time enough to shout a warning, "Look out, Al," to Ledoux, when the monster whirled him about and crashed his head against the metal floor of the spaceship. Drawing his ray gun, Ledoux fired point blank at the slug man. The powerful blast, which would have instantly disintegrated the body of a human being or other mammal, seemed to have absolutely no effect on the boneless body of the Callistonian. One of its weird, three-fingered hands shot out, grabbed the weapon and wrenched it out of Ledoux's grasp. Then it turned the ray gun on the Earthman. The mechanism, of course, was unfamiliar to the monstrosity, and this undoubtedly saved the space pilot's life. After fumbling for a second or two in an unsuccessful attempt to operate the weapon, the creature dropped it with a grunt of disgust and tackled Ledoux with its powerful, sinuous arms. Attracted by the noise, Helen Green and two of the other girls rushed to the door of the control room. One of them uttered a low moan and fainted dead away. The second girl ran screaming out of the spaceship. Helen was the only one who kept her head. Turning to Professor Anderson, who was right behind her, she snatched the supersonic projector out of his hand, thrust its muzzle into the slug man's side and squeezed the trigger. Like a deflated balloon, the huge body collapsed, flopping to the floor in a shapeless mass. Into it plumped Ledoux, his fall cushioned as if he had dropped into a quivering heap of jelly. Although he was trembling like an ash tree in an earthquake, Ledoux, thanks to his long experience in facing emergencies, instantly took command of the situation. "Quick, Anderson," he shouted. "Make sure all the women are inside. Then close the hatch and clamp it tight. Girls, climb into your hammocks instantly." As he was strapping himself into the control seat, he glanced through the observation ports. What he saw put extra speed into his fumbling fingers. Already the natives of Callisto were rushing back to the Goddard. Apparently the tremors of the dying tentacle had told them that they had been outwitted. Although they were still nearly a mile away, they were racing along at such a rapid speed that their arrival was only a matter of minutes. On they came, thousands of them. Even at a distance, Ledoux could sense the menace of their furious features and their threatening movements. Nevertheless, Ledoux made sure that all the women were safe in their hammocks before he snapped on the gravity nullifier and sent the Goddard rocketing through Callisto's stratosphere. Chapter 6 An amazing revelation. 3 days later, Captain Verger recovered consciousness. His head heavily bandaged, he was lying on a cot in a small white-walled room. The sickening odor of ether was in the air. Bending over him, he was surprised to see the kindly features of Professor Anderson. "Where am I? What happened?" he asked tritely. "You're in the Interplanetary Mining Company's hospital on Ganymede," Anderson told him. "I suppose you recall what happened to you on Callisto." "The last thing I remember is when that blasted devil of a slug man bashed my head against the floor of the Goddard." Anderson nodded and said, "Luckily for you, your skull turned out to be a thick one. Instead of being cracked wide open as any ordinary head would have been under the circumstances, your cranium was only dented. The doctor says you'll recover from the concussion, but it will be at least a month before you will be able to pilot a spaceship." "And what about the others?" "Ledoux, Helen Green, and the girls of the band. All of them are safe and sound." Then Anderson told him about the courage and resourcefulness which Helen had displayed when she saved the Earth people from the Callistonian Guard. "Mrs. Green sure is a swell girl," Verger murmured. "You don't know the half of it," the professor declared. "It was Helen who risked her life to give you first aid while we were taking off from Callisto. All the rest of us were strapped into our hammocks and seats to protect ourselves against the rapid acceleration. Dr. Williams told me that you owe your life to the way she took care of you both on the Goddard and here." "Do you mean to say that Helen has been my nurse at this hospital?" "That's right," Anderson smiled, "and I wouldn't be surprised if that was Helen coming down the corridor right now." As Helen Green entered the dimly lighted room, her beaming, radiant face and her lustrous, red hair reminded Verger of noonday sunshine on dear old Earth. Without making a sound, Anderson tiptoed out of the room, leaving Verger alone with his beautiful nurse. Her first actions and words astonished the hardened bachelor. Kneeling at his bedside with bowed head, she whispered, "Thank heaven you are all right." For a moment or two, neither of them spoke. Then Verger reached out and reverently stroked the lustrous, red curls which were pressed against the counterpane just above his chest. "You're a wonderful woman, Mrs. Green," he murmured. "The lucky chap who married you sure drew a prize." She surprised him by saying, "My name is not Mrs. Green and I am not married." "Then how did you get into the band, which was supposed to be composed exclusively of exiles' wives?" he demanded. "Oh, that was easy. You see, the real Mrs. Green is a friend of mine. She was selected to join the band and fly to her husband, who is one of the miners here. At the showdown, she lost her nerve. Apparently, she lacked the intestinal fortitude that it takes to embark on a space voyage. When I heard she was going to quit, I got her to let me take her place. So here I am." "But I still don't understand," Verger said. "If you haven't a husband here, why did you go on a journey which you must have known would be full of discomfort and danger?" She grinned and replied, "Oh, I don't know. I guess it must have been the gypsy in my soul." "Haven't you ever been married?" he asked. "Never," she smiled. "I'm one of those things that's commonly called a spinster." "That reminds me of a gag I heard a long time ago," Verger rejoined. "It seems that a high school girl, when asked to define that word, said, 'A spinster is the wife of a bachelor.' Then he added, 'I guess you know that I am a bachelor, don't you?'" Helen laughed and replied, "How could I help knowing that? Everyone tells me that you are an incurable woman hater. And that's the truth, isn't it, Captain Verger?" "All except the tense of the verb," he corrected her. "They should have told you that I was a woman hater until I met you, you plucky, red-headed angel, you." The end. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook. Rhythm Rides the Rocket. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the General Terms of Use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose, such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start, full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works. By using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Electronic Works 1.a. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the foundation or PGLOF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying, or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg, 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg trademark license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4 Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg trademark license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg trademark. 1.e.5 Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg trademark license. 1.e.6 You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg trademark work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg trademark website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee, or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg trademark license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7 Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any Project Gutenberg trademark works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8 You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works provided that, you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg trademark works calculated using the method you already use to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark works. 1.e.9 If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the manager of the Project Gutenberg trademark. Contact the Foundation as set forth in Section 3 below. 1.f.1.f.1 Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the Project Gutenberg trademark collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects, such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1.f.2 Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages, except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1.f.3, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs, and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty or breach of contract except those provided in paragraph 1.f.3. You agree that the foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive, or incidental damages even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1.f.3 Limited right of replacement or refund. If you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing without further opportunities to fix the problem. 1.f.4 Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1.f.3, this work is provided to you as is, with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1.f.5 Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1.f.6 Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the foundation, anyone providing copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the production, promotion, and distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs, and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur. A. Distribution of this or any Project Gutenberg trademark work. B. Alteration, modification, or additions or deletions to any Project Gutenberg trademark work, and C. Any defect you cause. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg trademark. Project Gutenberg trademark is synonymous with the free distribution of electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers including obsolete, old, middle-aged, and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the assistance they need are critical to reaching Project Gutenberg trademark's goals and ensuring that the Project Gutenberg trademark collection will remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure and permanent future for Project Gutenberg trademark and future generations. To learn more about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and how your efforts and donations can help, see sections 3 and 4 and the Foundation information page at www.gutenberg.org. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation is a non-profit 501(c)(3) educational corporation organized under the laws of the state of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The Foundation's IN or Federal Tax Identification Number is 64-6221541. Contributions to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation are tax-deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's business office is located at 809 North 1500 West, Salt Lake City, Utah 841-16801-596-1887. Email contact links and up-to-date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at www.gutenberg.org/contact section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Project Gutenberg trademark depends upon and cannot survive without widespread public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork, and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, we know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff. Please check the Project Gutenberg web pages for current donation methods and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways including checks, online payments, and credit card donations. To donate, please visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. Section 5. General information about Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. Professor Michael S. Hart was the originator of the Project Gutenberg trademark concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 40 years, he produced and distributed Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks with only a loose network of volunteer support. Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as not protected by copyright in the U.S. unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility, www.gutenberg.org. This website includes information about Project Gutenberg trademark, including how to make donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks. Rhythm rides the rocket, the full Project Gutenberg license.